He wasn't just a hockey player, he was a lightning bolt in skates, a national icon, a symbol of pride, defiance, and raw, unfiltered fire. Maurice "Rocket" Richard didn't glide across the ice. He tore through it. His stare could freeze goaltenders mid-breath. His slapshot was a warning, a crack of thunder that echoed through arenas. And his name? It still reverberates in every corner of Montreal, not just because of the goals he scored or the records he shattered, but because of the night the city burned in his name. This is not just the story of a man who played hockey. This is the story of a revolution with laces tied tight and a number 9 stitched on its back. Born on August 4th, 1921, in the working-class neighborhood of Nouveau Bordeaux in Montreal, Joseph-Henri Maurice Richard entered a world that offered little promise. His parents, Onésime and Alice Richard, were French-Canadian, devoutly Catholic, and struggling under the weight of the Great Depression. Maurice, the eldest of 8 children, grew up in a home where dreams outnumbered dollars. His father worked as a carpenter for the Canadian Pacific Railway, earning just enough to keep the family afloat. His mother held the household together with quiet resilience, her faith and patience a cornerstone for her children. Young Maurice found his escape on the frozen ponds of Montreal, wearing hand-me-down skates that pinched his feet and wielding a stick that had been patched together one too many times. But what he lacked in equipment, he made up for in sheer determination. By age 4, Maurice was already skating, his small frame darting across makeshift rinks. He practiced relentlessly, firing tennis balls against alleyway walls and dreaming of something bigger. By his teenage years, he was outscoring boys twice his size in local games, his raw talent undeniable. Yet, he remained an enigma, quiet, unassuming, and carrying the weight of a French-Canadian identity in a world dominated by English-speaking elites. He didn't speak English, didn't flaunt his skill, and had the stoic resolve of someone who knew life would never hand him anything. So he took it, one goal at a time. Maurice Richard's journey to hockey legend began in the rough-and-tumble rinks of Montreal's junior leagues. In 1938, at the age of 17, he laced up for the Verdun Maple Leafs in the Quebec Junior Hockey League, QJHL, a competitive circuit that showcased the province's most promising young talents. Even among his peers, Richard stood out as a phenomenon. His wiry frame belied an explosive speed and a scoring touch that left goalkeepers helpless. In his first full season with Verdun, he amassed an astonishing 133 points, goals and assists combined, in a single campaign. This was no ordinary feat. It was a statement of dominance, a signal that a new force had arrived. Opposing defenses scrambled to contain him, but Richard's relentless drive and uncanny ability to find the net made him nearly unstoppable. His performances in Verdun turned heads across Quebec. Scouts from higher-tier leagues took note of the young French-Canadian, who played with the ferocity of a seasoned veteran. By 1940, Richard had graduated to the Montreal Senior Canadiens in the Quebec Senior Hockey League, QSHL, a step closer to the professional ranks. The QSHL was a tougher proving ground, filled with older, more physical players, but Richard thrived. He continued to pile up goals, his stick handling and blistering wrist shot becoming the stuff of local legend. Yet, his early career was not without challenges. Injuries plagued him, a broken ankle in one season, a fractured wrist in another. Each setback tested his resilience, but Richard's response was always the same. He returned to the ice faster, stronger, and hungrier than before. His ability to bounce back from adversity only deepened the mystique surrounding him, as fans and coaches alike began to see the makings of a once-in-a-generation talent. In 1942, the Montreal Canadiens, one of the National Hockey League's most storied franchises, came calling. The team, desperate to reclaim its former glory after years of mediocrity, saw potential in the 21-year-old from Nouveau Bordeaux. But the decision to sign Richard was not without controversy. NHL executives and scouts whispered doubts about his durability. Too fragile, they said, pointing to his string of injuries in the junior and senior leagues. At 5'10" and barely 170 pounds, Richard didn't have the imposing physical presence of some of his contemporaries. His slight build and history of broken bones led many to question whether he could withstand the grueling physicality of the NHL. But Canadiens coach Dick Irvin saw something others missed: a fire in Richard's eyes, a refusal to be denied, and a scoring instinct that couldn't be taught. Irvin convinced the team to take a chance on the young forward, and in doing so, set the stage for one of the most remarkable careers in hockey history. Maurice Richard didn't just arrive in the NHL, he erupted into it. His rookie season in 1942-43 began with promise, as he showcased flashes of the brilliance that had made him a star in Quebec's amateur leagues. But, true to the skeptics' warnings, injury struck again. Just 16 games into the season, Richard suffered a broken ankle, sidelining him for the remainder of the campaign. For many young players, such a setback would have been a crushing blow. But for Richard, it was merely a detour. He spent his recovery time honing his skills, studying the game, and channeling his frustration into determination. When he returned for the 1943-44 season, he was a man possessed. That season, Richard transformed into a force of nature. Playing alongside linemates Elmer Lach and Toe Blake, later dubbed the Punch Line for their devastating offensive prowess, Richard tore through NHL defenses. He scored 32 goals in 46 games, a remarkable tally in an era when scoring was far less common than today. His goals weren't just numerous, they were electrifying. Richard had a knack for scoring in clutch moments, whether by bulldozing through defenders or unleashing a slapshot that seemed to defy physics. His intensity was palpable, his work ethic relentless. Fans at the Montreal Forum began to rise to their feet whenever he touched the puck, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The Canadiens, buoyed by Richard's emergence, surged to the top of the NHL standings. In the 1944 playoffs, they steamrolled their opponents, defeating the Toronto Maple Leafs and Chicago Blackhawks to capture the Stanley Cup, the franchise's first in 13 years. Richard's contributions were pivotal as he scored 12 goals in 9 playoff games, including a 5-goal performance against Toronto that left opponents and fans alike in awe. At 22, he was no longer a prospect. He was the heart and soul of the Canadiens, a player whose passion and talent were redefining what it meant to be a hockey star. If the 1943-44 season established Richard as a rising star, the 1944-45 season immortalized him. That year, he achieved what was then considered impossible: 50 goals in a 50-game NHL season. No player had ever come close to such a feat. The league's previous single-season goal-scoring record, set by Joe Malone in 1917-18, was 44 goals in a 20-game season. A different era with different rules. In the 1940s, with tighter defensive play and smaller, more physical rinks, scoring at such a pace seemed beyond human capability. But Richard didn't just break the mold, he obliterated it. Game after game, Richard attacked with a ferocity that left opponents reeling. His style was a blend of finesse and brute force. He could weave through defenders with the agility of a figure skater, then fire a shot with such velocity that goalkeepers barely had time to react. His signature move, a blazing rush down the wing followed by a wrist shot or slap shot, became a nightmare for opposing teams. Fans dubbed him the Rocket for his explosive speed and power, a nickname that captured his ability to ignite the ice with every shift. As the season progressed, the hockey world began to buzz about Richard's pursuit of 50 goals. With each goal, the anticipation grew. By the final game of the season, a matchup against the Boston Bruins on March 18, 1945, Richard sat at 49 goals. The Montreal Forum was electric, with 12,000 fans packed into the stands, sensing history in the making. In the second period, Richard broke free on a rush, took a pass from Lach, and fired a low shot past Bruins goalkeepers. The puck hit the back of the net, and the Forum erupted in a deafening roar. Richard had done it. 50 goals in 50 games. The Canadiens won 4-2, but the score was secondary to the milestone. Richard's achievement was front-page news across Canada, and his name was etched into the annals of sports history. The record stood untouched for 36 years, a testament to its magnitude. Not until 1981, when New York Islanders star Mike Bossy matched the feat, would another player reach the 50-50 mark. Even today, with longer seasons and more offensive-minded play, Richard's accomplishment remains one of hockey's most hallowed benchmarks. Beyond the numbers, Maurice Richard's rise carried a deeper significance. To French Canadians in the 1940s and 50s, he was more than a hockey player. He was a beacon of their identity. At the time, Canada was a nation divided along linguistic and cultural lines. English-speaking elites dominated the country's political, economic, and sporting institutions, often marginalizing French Canadians in Quebec. In this context, Richard's success was a powerful act of defiance. He was a French Canadian from a working-class neighborhood, a man who spoke little English and carried the weight of his people's struggles on his shoulders. Every goal he scored, every hit he delivered, was a statement. French Canadians could not only compete, but excel on the national stage. Richard's style of play embodied this defiance. He wasn't just a scorer, he was a warrior. He played with a fire that seemed to burn for every slight, every injustice faced by his community. When he fought, and he fought often, it was personal, as if he were standing up for all of Quebec. His battles on the ice, whether with fists or with goals, resonated deeply with French-Canadian fans, who saw in him a champion of their pride and resilience. To them, Richard was more than a player. He was a symbol of their struggle, their aspirations, and their unyielding spirit. Richard's career was a litany of accolades and triumphs. Between 1944 and 1959, he helped the Canadians win 8 Stanley Cups, a remarkable feat that underscored his ability to perform under pressure. His playoff heroics were legendary. He scored 82 goals in 132 postseason games, many of them in critical moments. He led the NHL in goals 5 times, 1944 to 45, 1946 to 47, 1949 to 50, 1953 to 54, and 1954 to 55, and was named to 14 All-Star teams, including 8 first-team selections. In 1957, he became the first player in NHL history to score 500 career goals, a milestone that cemented his status as one of the game's all-time greats. The record held until Gordie Howe surpassed it in 1963, but Richard's achievement was no less monumental for it. His playing style, gritty, explosive, and unyielding, set the template for the modern power forward. Richard wasn't the biggest player on the ice, but he played with a ferocity that made him seem larger than life. He combined speed, strength, and an unparalleled scoring touch, making him a threat every time he stepped onto the rink. His influence on the game was profound, inspiring generations of players to emulate his intensity and passion. March 13, 1955, Boston Garden. The Canadians were facing the Boston Bruins in a heated game. Late in the third period, Bruins defenseman Hal Laycoe high-sticked Richard across the head, drawing blood. No penalty was called. To Richard, the lack of a call wasn't just a missed infraction, it was a lack of respect, a slight against him and everything he represented. Enraged, he retaliated, swinging his stick at Laycoe. The situation escalated into a brawl, and in the chaos, Richard struck linesman Cliff Thompson in the face. 4 days later, on March the 17th, NHL President Clarence Campbell, an English-Canadian from Ontario, issued his ruling. Richard was suspended for the remainder of the regular season and the entire playoffs. It was the harshest punishment ever handed to a star player in NHL history. Richard was leading the league in scoring, and the Canadians were neck and neck with the Detroit Red Wings for first place. The suspension cost Richard the scoring title, which went to teammate Bernie Geoffrion by a single point, and likely cost the Canadians the Stanley Cup. In Quebec, the suspension was seen as more than a disciplinary action. To French Canadians, already resentful of decades of cultural and economic marginalization, it felt like an attack on their identity. Campbell, an English-speaking authority figure, was silencing their hero, a French Canadian who had risen to greatness against all odds. The decision ignited a firestorm. On March 17, 1955, the Canadians faced the Detroit Red Wings at the Montreal Forum. Despite bomb threats and warnings from Montreal's mayor, Campbell attended the game, sitting defiantly in the front row. The moment he appeared, the crowd of 14,000 erupted in boos, jeers, and projectiles. Eggs, tomatoes, and insults rained down. Then, midway through the first period, someone threw a tear gas bomb. Chaos erupted. The game was forfeited, the forum evacuated. Outside, a crowd of thousands spilled onto Sainte Catherine Street, turning it into a battleground. Windows were smashed, stores looted, police cars overturned, and fires lit. The riot raged through the night, resulting in over 70 arrests and more than $100,000 in damages, equivalent to over $1 million today. Richard, listening to the events unfold on the radio from his home, was devastated. He had never wanted this. The next day he addressed his people in French, his voice heavy with humility. "I will take my punishment and come back next year to help the club and the younger players to win the cup. Do no more harm." His words, broadcast across Quebec, quelled the violence. The fires stopped, but the scars remained. The Canadiens lost the Stanley Cup to Detroit that year. Fans blamed Campbell and the NHL, but never Richard. If anything, their love for him grew stronger. He wasn't just a player anymore, he was a martyr, a symbol of resistance, and a rallying cry for French-Canadian pride. When Richard returned for the 1955-56 season, he was unstoppable. He led the Canadiens to 4 consecutive Stanley Cups from 1956 to 1960, cementing his legacy as one of hockey's greatest champions. He retired in 1960 at age 39, with 544 career goals, a number so iconic that the NHL later named its annual goal-scoring award the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy. Beyond the ice, Richard's impact was profound. The Richard Riot is now studied as a pivotal moment in Canadian history, a precursor to the Quiet Revolution of the 1960s, when French Canadians asserted their cultural and political power in Quebec. In this sense, Richard didn't just change hockey, he helped change a country. His influence extended to future generations of French-Canadian players, from Jean Béliveau to Guy Lafleur to Martin St. Louis, all of whom carried the Rockets' fire. Though he never played internationally, NHL players were barred from the Olympics in his era, his legend transcended borders. Off the ice, Richard was a paradox, a fierce competitor who was shy and soft-spoken, uncomfortable with the spotlight. After retiring, he coached briefly for the Quebec Nordiques in the World Hockey Association, but stepped down after just 2 games, realizing it wasn't for him. He preferred a quieter life, owning a tavern, fishing, and spending time with his family. He endorsed Molson beer and tried his hand at various business ventures, some successful, others less so. Richard married Lucille Norche in 1942, and they raised 7 children together. When Lucille died in 1994, Richard was devastated, sinking into a depression from which he never fully recovered. In 2000, cancer claimed his life at age 78. Montreal went silent. Over 115,000 people filed through the Molson Center to pay their respects, and his funeral was a state affair. Quebec Premier Lucien Bouchard called him a symbol of our identity. Richard received numerous honors, the Order of Canada, the National Order of Quebec, and an arena named in his honor. His number 9 jersey was the first ever retired by the Canadiens, a fitting tribute to a man who embodied the franchise's spirit. You don't have to be a Canadiens fan to admire Maurice Richard. You don't even have to love hockey. But if you believe in standing your ground, playing with heart, and fighting for your people against all odds, you understand him. His story is one of grit, defiance, and unyielding pride, a reminder that one person can spark a revolution. Even today, when a player scores their 50th goal or drops the gloves in the name of honor, you can feel it in the rafters of the Bell Center, under the banner that reads Richard 9. The fire still burns. The rocket never left.